I'm banning your goldfish pond. 30 days to drain it completely.
Brenda Ashworth slammed the violation notice against my father's memorial pond, her finger stabbing at the order, demanding I destroy the 12-by-8 sanctuary my dying father built with trembling hands. Health hazard, she sneered, nose wrinkling at the gentle waterfall.
This backyard swamp is ruining property values for everyone.
I watched her designer heels click away from the legally permitted pond that had existed since 1998. 3 houses down, my neighbor's above-ground pool leaked green sludge into the street. 0 violations. Funny how that worked. But here's what Brenda didn't know. I was about to turn her worst nightmare into my greatest weapon. My goldfish weren't the only ones living in that pond. And what I did next made it legally impossible for any HOA to touch it, ever. Comment below with your worst HOA story. Mine involves turning the tables on a neighborhood dictator. Let me back up and tell you how this war started. My name's Cove Donnelly, 52 years old, recently retired from 30 years building Caterpillar engines. When most guys my age are planning fishing trips, I was planning my father's funeral. Big Jim Donnelly had a stroke last spring, 81 years old, tougher than a $2 steak, but blood clots don't negotiate. I inherited his house in Willowbrook Estates, suburban Columbus, where every lawn looks identical and conformity is king. The house came with Dad's masterpiece, a 12-by-8 kidney-shaped pond built in summer '98. We're talking serious craftsmanship, natural stone border, 3-tier waterfall, proper filtration. Dad spent 3 months laying every rock by hand, his arthritic fingers bleeding on limestone edges. The garage still smelled like wet concrete and his Old Spice when I cleaned it out. That pond wasn't decoration, it was Dad's therapy after Mom died. 6 goldfish lived there. Groucho, Harpo, Chico, Zeppo, Gummo, and Fat Orange Zeppo Jr. Every Friday evening, Dad would crack a Budweiser and feed them while sharing his week's stories. I kept that ritual going. The neighborhood was built in 1995, back when HOAs suggested, instead of dictated. Original bylaws, 2 pages of common sense. Keep your lawn decent, don't paint purple, no boats in driveways. The pond got proper city permits, variants for decorative water feature with ecological benefits. Everything legal, everything documented. Then, Hurricane Brenda hit Maple Street. Brenda Ashworth moved in 2 years ago, armed with a fresh real estate license and social climbing ambitions. Picture this: 48 years old, irons her yoga pants, color coordinates coffee mugs, razor-straight blonde bob that defies physics, business casual for checking mail, iPad surgically attached to manicured fingers. She joined the HOA board within 6 months, president within a year. Campaign promise: elevating community standards for maximum property values. Translation: terrorizing neighbors for sales commissions. Mrs. Elise got cited for culturally inappropriate garden decorations. Apparently, ceramic dragons didn't scream American dream hard enough. Dave Santos faced fines for his mailbox height. Jennifer Wu, our environmental lawyer, got violations for parking her Prius overnight. Eco-friendly cars apparently clashed with Brenda's suburban vision. But here's where it got interesting. I started noticing small wildlife around the pond Dad never mentioned. Dragonflies hunting mosquitoes at sunset, tiny frogs hiding under lily pads, the occasional blue heron stopping for breakfast. One morning, I spotted something that made me grab my reading glasses. A painted turtle sunning itself on the stone edge, shell patterns like natural art. I didn't think much of it then, just nature doing its thing in Dad's peaceful corner. Little did I know that turtle would become my secret weapon. The first violation notice arrived Tuesday morning, September 15th. Certified mail interrupting my coffee. Violation number 2024-0847. Unauthorized water feature creating health hazards and mosquito breeding grounds. 30 days to remove unauthorized structure or face escalating fines. The paper felt cheap between my calloused fingers, probably printed at Kinko's on her dime. That metallic taste of pure rage hit my tongue as I read Brenda's bureaucratic garbage. Outside, Dad's waterfall gurgled peacefully, mixing with morning bird songs and distant traffic hum. Unauthorized? I had permits older than her real estate career. But this wasn't about health codes or property values. This was about control. Brenda Ashworth had built her HOA empire by bullying anyone who didn't fit her pristine neighborhood fantasy. People who looked different, acted different, or in my case, honored family traditions that predated her authority. The violation notice demanded immediate compliance with current community aesthetic standards, code words for erasing anything that made our cookie-cutter neighborhood feel like home. My pond wasn't just violating her rules, it was violating her vision of profitable suburban perfection. She picked the wrong retired machinist to bully. Because 30 years fixing Caterpillar engines teaches you one thing: every system has weak points, and I was about to find hers. I had 10 days to respond to the violation notice when Brenda decided to escalate. Because apparently, waiting for due process is for peasants. The second notice arrived with a $50 daily fine, starting in 10 days. But here's the kicker. I discovered Brenda's real strategy when my neighbor accidentally included me in a group text chain. Dave Santos was trying to forward a recipe and fat-fingered my number into Brenda's concerned neighbors circle. My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with a coordinated character assassination campaign. Unseemly water feature creating mosquito problems. Property values declining because of backyard swamp. Attracting undesirable elements to our family neighborhood. The smell of my coffee went from comforting to bitter as I scrolled through message after message. 23 neighbors I'd lived peacefully beside for 2 years, suddenly convinced my father's memorial was a public health crisis. Brenda had orchestrated this beautifully. Plant the seed of doubt, let fear and property values do the rest. While Brenda was busy playing puppet master, I was playing detective. I spent that weekend at the county courthouse, diving into dusty filing cabinets that smelled like old paper and decades of bureaucratic neglect. My years troubleshooting Caterpillar systems had taught me that every breakdown starts with understanding the original specifications. Same principle applied here. Turns out, Brenda's violation crusade had a massive legal flaw. She was enforcing rules that didn't exist when my pond was built. Her Aesthetic Standards Amendment had passed 4-3 during last summer's meeting, but only 7 people attended out of 43 total homeowners. I remembered reading somewhere that HOA amendments need majority approval from all members, not just meeting attendees. My pond was grandfathered under the original 1995 bylaws, protected by prior non-conforming use. The 1998 permits included variance language about ecological benefits, language that would become very important later. But Brenda wasn't done playing dirty. Wednesday morning, she showed up unannounced with her HOA compliance officer. Turns out this was Jake, her 19-year-old nephew armed with a clipboard and delusions of authority. Kid looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, probably because any sane teenager would. "We need to measure water surface area and test for contaminants," Brenda announced, marching toward my backyard like she owned the place. Her heels clicked against my driveway with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire HOA presidency. "Sorry, Brenda, private property rights still apply, even to HOA presidents." Her face went through several interesting color changes, from corporate beige to angry red. "This is HOA business, Mr. Donnelly. You signed the covenant." "I signed it in 1995. You rewrote it in 2024 without proper authority." I handed her a copy of the original bylaws I'd printed at the courthouse. "Feel free to show me where it says anything about ponds." Jake shuffled his feet, clearly wishing he'd called in sick. The kid had enough sense to recognize a legal minefield when he saw one, smart enough to stay quiet while his aunt dug herself deeper. That afternoon, Brenda launched her community pressure campaign. She distributed flyers about health risks of stagnant water, complete with stock photos of mosquito larvae that definitely didn't come from my well-maintained pond. Door-to-door visits to spread concern about property values. Social media posts about certain homeowners refusing to cooperate with community safety initiatives. The psychological warfare worked. Neighbors who'd waved for 2 years suddenly found their lawns fascinating when I walked by. Mrs. Elise mentioned at the grocery store that people are talking, the suburban equivalent of social excommunication. Friday evening brought my weekly ritual, sitting by the pond with a beer and fish food, questioning whether this fight was worth the hassle. The waterfall's gentle gurgle mixed with evening cricket chirps, while Groucho surfaced first, his mouth making tiny pops at the water surface. The rest of the Marx Brothers crew followed, completely indifferent to HOA politics. That's when I noticed my painted turtle friend again, basking on the stone border like he owned the place. Something about his complete indifference to human drama made me smile for the first time all week. He'd probably been there longer than Brenda had lived in the neighborhood. Monday brought Brenda's legal warning shot, a formal letter from Ashworth and Associates Legal Services, which sounded impressive until I Googled it and discovered Associates meant her cousin's paralegal certificate and a subscription to LegalZoom. But I fired back with my own formal grievance to the HOA board, citing procedural violations in the amendment process. I included copies of my 1998 permits, property deed restrictions, and a detailed timeline of Brenda's harassment campaign. From my years dealing with corporate bureaucracy, I'd learned that most bullies back down when faced with actual documentation instead of neighborhood gossip. The response came from an actual attorney this time, which told me Brenda was taking this seriously enough to spend real money. She was doubling down instead of backing down. That's when I knew this wasn't just about my pond anymore. This was about power, control, and whether one person could rewrite the rules to suit their agenda. Brenda had declared war on the wrong retired machinist. Time to show her what 30 years of troubleshooting had taught me about finding weak points in broken systems. Brenda's next move proved she wasn't just petty, she was smart, and that made her dangerous. She hired an environmental consultant to inspect my pond. I use quotes because this guy turned out to be Rick's Landscape Services, with a clipboard and a biology degree from Google University. But the official-looking report fooled the HOA board. Potential mosquito breeding site despite homeowners' weekly maintenance protocols. The HOA board voted 3-2 to uphold the violation. Brenda controlled 2 other votes through various neighborhood favors and unspoken threats. I'd seen her helping Mrs. Patterson with her grocery bags right before the meeting. Financial pressure ramped up. Fines increased to $100 daily, retroactive to the original notice date. $3,000 and counting. While Brenda played political games, I was doing my homework. Late-night internet research revealed something that made my blood boil hotter than overheated engine coolant. Brenda wasn't targeting my pond out of spite. She was targeting it for profit. Her real estate listings featured our neighborhood at premium prices, marketing materials boasting pristine community standards and rigorous aesthetic compliance. My father's memorial pond appeared in her sales pitch as an example of what buyers wouldn't have to tolerate. Digging deeper, I found her previous neighborhood's homeowner forums. Story after story of systematic harassment. Elderly residents bullied over garden choices. Families targeted for non-conforming decorations. Calculated cruelty disguised as property value protection. One post called her a real estate terrorist who monetizes neighborhood misery. The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth as the truth hit me. This woman was profiting off destroying my father's memory. But discovery revealed something else. I wasn't her only victim. Dave Santos mentioned his wife's garden club troubles, but I hadn't connected the dots. Jennifer Wu's Prius violations weren't random harassment. Brenda was systematically targeting anyone who didn't fit her white-bread suburban fantasy. Time to build a coalition. Dave turned out to be a goldmine of intelligence. Over beers in his garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and old leather work gloves that reminded me of Dad's workshop, he confirmed my suspicions. Brenda had threatened his wife's garden club membership over non-compliance issues. Maria Santos's vegetable garden was apparently inconsistent with ornamental landscaping standards. She's got everyone walking on eggshells, Dave said, the bitter taste of defeat in his voice. Remember the Hendersons? Moved out last month rather than fight her basketball hoop violation. Said it wasn't worth the stress. Jennifer Wu became our third ally, offering legal advice over coffee at her kitchen table, covered with law books that smelled like library dust and determination. She'd been researching HOA authority since her own violation notices started piling up. Here's what's fascinating, Jennifer said, pointing to a highlighted passage. Ohio has specific protections for beneficial ecosystems, even on private property. If your pond supports native species, that triggers different regulations entirely. I started documenting the pond's ecosystem more carefully. Daily photo logs revealed what Dad probably never noticed. Dragonflies hunting mosquitoes at sunset, small frogs managing insect populations, beneficial bacteria keeping water crystal clear. Most importantly, during my morning coffee ritual, I spotted something that made my heart skip. My painted turtle friend had company. A second shell pattern, slightly smaller, basking on the opposite stone. Jennifer's eyes lit up when I showed her the photos. Painted turtles are protected under state conservation guidelines. If you're supporting a breeding population, she trailed off, but I could see the legal wheels turning. From my years fixing broken systems, I knew that sometimes the solution comes from an unexpected angle. While Brenda was focused on HOA bylaws, maybe I needed to think bigger, federal bigger. But Brenda wasn't waiting for my counterattack. I came home from the hardware store to find her standing in my backyard with a garden hose, literally stealing water from my father's memorial to fill her own flower beds. The sight of this woman draining Dad's pond made my hands shake with pure fury. "What the hell are you doing?" "Emergency mosquito abatement," she said without shame, designer heels sinking into my wet grass. "Health code enforcement. Get off my property, now." "This is community business, Cove. Your stubborn refusal to cooperate has forced my hand." Officer Martinez arrived to find Brenda still holding the hose, arguing that HOA authority superseded basic property rights. Watching her explain to a bemused cop why she could drain my pond was almost worth the violation fines. Almost. The police report noted no legal authority for HOA presidents to access private property without consent. Small victory, but it established the paper trail that would become crucial later. That evening, sitting by my slightly depleted pond, while crickets chirped their evening song, I realized Brenda had made a critical error. She'd escalated from bureaucratic harassment to actual crime. The woman who claimed to protect property values had just violated the most basic property right of all. She'd also shown me something else. She was desperate enough to break laws. Which meant my research into federal wildlife protection wasn't just interesting, it was survival. Because if Brenda wanted to play hardball, I was about to introduce her to the major leagues. Brenda's desperation hit full throttle when she discovered my federal wildlife research through city clerk records. Apparently my FOIA requests weren't as private as I'd hoped. Her panic response was swift and stupid. An emergency HOA meeting about the immediate health crisis posed by my pond. The meeting notice, delivered with fire drill urgency, warned about escalating mosquito-borne disease risks and potential community liability. She even invited city code enforcement to educate residents about water feature regulations, which backfired when I discovered the city had zero restrictions on residential ponds under 500 square feet. Better yet, they actively encouraged wildlife-supporting water features as environmental sustainability initiatives. The petition she circulated, demanding immediate removal of unauthorized structures, collected 18 signatures from neighbors who'd never seen my pond but trusted her authority. The acrid smell of desperation clung to her like burnt coffee. While Brenda panicked, I methodically built my case. 3 weeks of city council meetings taught me actual municipal regulations instead of Brenda's fantasy rules. Jennifer Wu's wildlife survey revealed something extraordinary. My pond wasn't just supporting painted turtles. It hosted native salamanders, beneficial insects, and seasonal visits from migratory waterfowl. Those blue herons I'd been photographing weren't just pretty birds. They made my pond federally significant under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Any habitat supporting protected waterfowl, even temporarily, triggered federal oversight that could trump local regulations entirely. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected ally. Mrs. Elise, exhausted by walking on eggshells around Brenda, revealed something explosive during our chance grocery store encounter. "I saw her coaching that environmental man," Mrs. Elise whispered, her voice trembling with nervous energy. She showed him exactly what violations to write down. The whole inspection was fake. That revelation opened floodgates of neighborhood intelligence. Dave Santos confirmed suspicious patterns. Every contractor Brenda recommended kickbacked money to her real estate business. Her nephew Jake wasn't just enforcing violations. He was collecting $500 monthly from HOA funds as a community compliance specialist. The woman had turned our association into her personal ATM. Armed with this intelligence, I started connecting corruption dots that would make a federal prosecutor drool. But Brenda was past caring about legal niceties. Tuesday morning, I woke to the chemical stench of chlorine burning my nostrils before I even reached the back door. My pond water had turned cloudy gray, dead goldfish floating among lily pads like orange accusations. The empty bleach bottle bobbing near the waterfall told the whole story. Zeppo Jr., Dad's favorite, struggled near the surface, his vibrant scales dulled by chemical poisoning. My hands shook with rage as I scooped dying fish into buckets of clean water, desperately trying to save what remained of 6 years of careful ecosystem balance. The painted turtles had vanished, either dead or smart enough to escape before the poison spread. This woman had just committed ecological murder to protect her property values. But Brenda made one fatal mistake. I'd installed a trail camera after her previous trespassing. The infrared footage was crystal clear. Brenda sneaking across my yard at 2:47 a.m., designer heels sinking into damp grass as she poured industrial bleach directly into the water feature she'd spent months trying to eliminate. Her face was perfectly visible, her movements deliberate, her crime documented in high definition. Officer Martinez returned with Detective Rivera this time. Watching Brenda try to explain away video evidence was like watching someone strangle themselves with their own lies. Water treatment procedures, she insisted, her voice cracking under pressure. Community-authorized mosquito control. Ma'am, Detective Rivera said, his patience evaporating like pond water in summer heat. This is criminal trespassing, vandalism, and animal cruelty. You poisoned someone's pets on camera. I filed reports for trespassing, vandalism, and animal endangerment. Jennifer Wu prepared civil lawsuit papers for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The woman who'd terrorized me with violation notices was about to discover what real legal consequences felt like. But the most satisfying call came from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Criminal interference with protected migratory bird habitat carries federal penalties up to $50,000 per violation, Agent Sarah Martinez explained, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. We'll need to investigate the full extent of ecological damage to your certified wildlife habitat. Certified wildlife habitat. Those 3 words changed everything. While Brenda had been playing neighborhood dictator, I'd been accidentally hosting a federal sanctuary. Dad's simple goldfish pond had evolved into something legally untouchable, protected by laws that made HOA bylaws look like crayon drawings. That evening, sitting beside kiddie pools filled with recovering goldfish, while the gentle hum of air pumps mixed with cricket songs, I finally understood what was coming. This wasn't just about my pond anymore. This was about federal wildlife protection laws meeting suburban tyranny. Brenda had poisoned the wrong ecosystem. The United States government was coming to my neighborhood, and they weren't bringing violation notices. They were bringing handcuffs. The discovery that changed everything came from Dave Santos, of all people. While I was fighting pond violations, he'd been doing his own detective work, and what he found made my hands shake with anticipation. Sit in his garage Tuesday evening, surrounded by the familiar smell of WD-40 and stale coffee. Dave spread property surveys across his workbench like a treasure map. "Cove, you're gonna love this," he said, grinning like a kid with firecrackers. "Our HOA president who's always preaching about property standards, she's got her own little violation problem." The documents showed Brenda's decorative fence extending 2.3 feet into community green space, a clear easement violation existing since she moved in. But here's the beautiful irony. As HOA president, she'd personally approved her own illegal installation. Nobody wanted to cause trouble back then, Dave explained, tracing property lines with a grease-stained finger. "We figured if the HOA president said it was okay, it must be legal." I stared at those survey lines, feeling the same satisfaction I used to get when finding the exact loose bolt causing an engine failure. After months of Brenda's harassment, I'd finally found her weak point. But Dave's discovery was just the appetizer. Jennifer Wu arrived 20 minutes later with research that made my pulse quicken, like a Caterpillar engine hitting peak RPM. Her legal investigation had uncovered systematic financial corruption that would end Brenda's reign permanently. She approved $15,000 in community beautification contracts, Jennifer said, spreading bank records across the workbench. Paid directly to Ashworth Realty Services LLC, her own company. Half the work was never completed. The taste of victory was already sweet on my tongue. While Brenda had been lecturing us about community standards, she'd been looting our association funds. This wasn't just conflict of interest. This was federal embezzlement. But the nuclear option came from an unexpected phone call. Dr. Sarah Martinez from Fish and Wildlife Service had completed her emergency assessment of my poisoned pond. The official report made me want to dance around Dave's garage. Beneficial microhabitat supporting breeding population of state-protected painted turtles. Your pond qualifies for immediate federal habitat protection, Dr. Martinez explained, her voice carrying the weight of government authority. The breeding turtle pair alone triggers conservation protocols that supersede all local regulations. I had to sit down as the implications hit me. The same pond Brenda spent 6 months trying to eliminate was about to become federally untouchable, protected by laws that made HOA bylaws look like grocery lists. The timeline made perfect sense now. Brenda wasn't harassing me for sport. She was trying to close a $380,000 house sale. Her buyers had specifically mentioned pristine neighborhood standards in their offer, and her commission would net $11,400. The closing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. Federal habitat designation would kill that deal instantly. No buyer wants property next to a government-protected ecosystem that prevents future modifications. Jennifer explained the beautiful legal reality. Federal protection creates 50-year conservation commitment that overrides any local authority. My pond wouldn't just be safe from Brenda, it would be legally impossible for anyone to touch, ever. She can't drain what the federal government says can't be drained, Jennifer said, her lawyer's smile sharp enough to cut glass. My strategy crystallized with mechanical precision. Federal habitat application for legal immunity, corruption evidence for the kill shot, and community education to turn neighbors against her. Brenda had spent 6 months trying to eliminate my father's memorial to boost her sales commission. Instead, she'd handed me the perfect weapon to eliminate her authority permanently. The federal government was about to make my Goldfish pond more legally protected than most state parks. And my HOA president, who'd built her empire on bullying powerless neighbors, was about to discover what real power looked like. The hunter was about to become the hunted. With my strategy clear, it was time to execute the most satisfying project of my retirement, turning Brenda's worst nightmare into federally protected reality. The habitat protection application sprawled across my kitchen table like engineering blueprints, 47 pages of bureaucratic precision that would make my pond legally bulletproof. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with printer ink as I worked through every detail. GPS coordinates measured to the inch, water pH tested daily, soil samples analyzed by Jennifer's environmental contacts. Each question demanded perfection. Seasonal wildlife photography, detailed ecosystem management plans, native species documentation, all the evidence I'd been collecting without knowing I was building a federal case. Those casual pictures of blue herons and painted turtles had become legal ammunition. The paperwork promised sweet revenge disguised as conservation. Federal designation would give me $2,400 annual tax deductions, plus property tax exemptions. Brenda's attack on my pond would actually save me money while destroying her authority. Dad would have loved that irony. But applications were just paper. The real work happened in my backyard. Weekend mornings became habitat construction projects that felt like honoring Dad's memory, while simultaneously building Brenda's destruction. I installed native Ohio plants around the pond perimeter. Wild bergamot for bees, cardinal flower for hummingbirds, blue flag iris for dragonflies. The familiar bite of shovel into earth and the rich smell of fresh mulch brought back memories of working alongside Dad in his garden. Each plant was strategically chosen to support the interconnected ecosystem federal protection required. Creating turtle luxury resorts from salvaged caterpillar parts, precision-cut aluminum, and weatherproof bolts that would make federal inspectors smile with approval. The satisfying whir of my drill, mixed with water trickling over stones, creating a symphony of preparation. Meanwhile, Dave Santos launched our Neighborhood History Project, intelligence gathering disguised as community nostalgia. His cover story about documenting local development gave us perfect excuse to interview residents about Brenda's harassment patterns. The stories poured out like water through a broken dam. Mrs. Patterson revealed threats over her holiday decorations. The Kowalskis confirmed pressure to replace ethnic garden plants with more appropriate landscaping. 3 families admitted considering moves rather than fighting increasingly ridiculous violations. She told Maria her tomatoes were inconsistent with ornamental standards, Dave reported over beers in his garage, the familiar smell of motor oil and leather work gloves surrounding us. Tomatoes, Cove. She tried to ban vegetables. Jennifer Wu built our legal arsenal through research that turned her dining room into a war room of case precedents. Coffee-stained law books and laptop screens glowing late into evening hours as she documented similar HOA corruption prosecutions. Pattern evidence destroys their credibility, she explained, highlighting passages about systematic targeting and financial irregularities. Federal authorities love cases that combine environmental crimes with embezzlement. My technical education meant absorbing wildlife law through online courses that turned quiet evenings into legal boot camp. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, Endangered Species Protocols, Conservation Easement Benefits. I soaked up federal regulations like hydraulic fluid into work clothes. Those courses revealed the beautiful truth. Federal wildlife violations carried criminal penalties serious enough to end careers and reputations. Interference with protected habitat triggered FBI investigation, especially combined with financial crimes like embezzlement. But timing would make or break everything. I scheduled the official federal inspection for Brenda's house closing week, creating maximum pressure when she was most vulnerable. Her buyers would discover federal wildlife designation during their final title search, exactly when backing out would cost her the most. Media coordination meant calling in Dave's teaching connections. His former colleague at the Columbus Dispatch loved the federal versus local authority angle, especially with environmental protection trending in local politics. Retired machinist using wildlife law to defeat HOA tyranny? Reporter Mike Elise's eyes lit up during our coffee meeting. That's front page gold. David versus Goliath with painted turtles. The publicity strategy framed everything as environmental protection rather than personal revenge. Cove Donnelly, suburban conservationist, protecting local wildlife from bureaucratic overreach, much cleaner than angry homeowners seeking payback. Community education meant planning a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate local wildlife, really demonstrating broad support while exposing Brenda's corruption. I invited Dr. Martinez to speak about suburban conservation, positioning federal involvement as community benefit rather than government intrusion. The taste of anticipation was sharp and metallic, like the moment before starting a perfectly tuned engine. Every component moved into position with mechanical precision. Federal applications submitted and under review. Corruption evidence documented and ready. Community support mobilized and growing. Media attention focused and sympathetic. While Brenda played neighborhood dictator with violation notices and HOA politics, I was building something she couldn't comprehend, an alliance between federal wildlife protection laws and suburban conservation reality. She'd spent months trying to eliminate my pond through local authority. She was about to discover that some fights require weapons bigger than clipboards and community standards. The federal government was coming to Willowbrook Estates, and they weren't bringing violation notices. They were bringing badges. Brenda's desperation reached critical mass when she discovered my federal application through city clerk records. Her response was swift, stupid, and exactly what I'd hoped for. She scheduled an emergency HOA vote to authorize immediate health hazard removal procedures, basically trying to drain my pond before the feds could protect it. The meeting notice, printed on her personal letterhead and distributed at midnight, declared my pond an imminent public safety crisis requiring emergency intervention. But Brenda's panic made her sloppy. She hired a contractor to begin mosquito abatement procedures, without bothering to check whether emergency powers actually existed in our HOA bylaws. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Tuesday morning, I watched from my kitchen window as Rick's Landscaping pulled up with pond draining equipment. The crew looked confused when I handed them copies of my pending federal protection application and trespassing warnings. Smart contractors don't work without clear legal authority, especially when federal wildlife crimes carry $50,000 fines. "Ma'am, we can't touch this without a court order," the crew chief told Brenda, his voice carrying the weight of someone who dealt with crazy homeowners before. This paperwork says federal investigation is pending. Watching Brenda argue with contractors while standing ankle-deep in my wet grass was almost worth 6 months of harassment. Almost. She lost her deposit when they packed up and left, but more importantly, she'd shown the neighborhood exactly how desperate she'd become. That night brought her most spectacular mistake yet. My trail camera captured everything at 2:17 a.m., Brenda sneaking across my yard with industrial chlorine, intent on finishing what her contractors wouldn't start. But this time, she wasn't just poisoning goldfish. She was interfering with federally protected wildlife habitat under active investigation. The video showed her pouring bleach directly into water that housed painted turtles covered by federal conservation protocols. What had been trespassing and animal cruelty 6 months ago was now a federal crime with prison time attached. I called Agent Martinez before calling local police. "Ma'am, we need to treat this as criminal interference with protected wildlife habitat," she said, her voice carrying new urgency. "Federal marshals will coordinate with local authorities on evidence collection." Officer Rivera arrived with federal backup, 2 serious-looking agents who treated my backyard like a crime scene. Watching them photograph bleach residue and collect water samples while Brenda stood in handcuffs was the kind of satisfaction that 30 years of fixing broken systems had trained me to appreciate. "This is harassment," Brenda screamed as they loaded her into the patrol car. "He's the one violating community standards." "Ma'am," Agent Martinez replied calmly, "federal wildlife protection supersedes all local regulations. You've just committed a federal crime on camera." But Brenda's legal troubles were just beginning. While she spent Tuesday night in county lockup, Jennifer Wu filed our civil harassment lawsuit, complete with 6 months of documented violations, financial corruption evidence, and now federal wildlife interference charges. The Columbus Dispatch ran the story Wednesday morning. HOA president arrested for poisoning protected wildlife habitat. The article included my trail camera footage and interviews with federal agents explaining wildlife protection laws. Suddenly, our neighborhood drama was regional news. 3 more homeowners came forward with Brenda harassment stories, creating a pattern of systematic abuse that federal prosecutors love. Mrs. Kim revealed Brenda had threatened her over culturally inappropriate landscaping. The Johnsons confirmed pressure to remove their children's playground equipment for aesthetic violations. "She told me my vegetable garden attracted undesirable elements," Maria Santos told the reporter, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. What she really meant was it attracted Mexicans. Jennifer Wu documented everything for our expanding class action harassment suit. Pattern evidence of discriminatory enforcement strengthens federal civil rights violations, she explained, her legal mind already calculating damages. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources contacted me directly about expanding my habitat protection to include the entire stormwater retention area behind our neighborhood. "Your pond sits at the headwaters of Willow Creek," Dr. Sarah Kim explained during her site visit. "Federal protection here could trigger watershed conservation that covers 3 square miles of suburban development. 3 square miles. That included Brenda's house, her buyer's property, and half the neighborhood she'd terrorized with violation notices. Federal watershed protection would make future development virtually impossible, killing property values for the very buyers she'd poisoned my pond to attract." While Brenda sat in jail, explaining federal wildlife crimes to public defenders, I was accidentally becoming the focal point of regional environmental conservation. My father's simple goldfish pond had evolved into the legal foundation for protecting an entire suburban ecosystem. That evening, feeding my surviving goldfish while federal signs marked my property boundaries, I finally understood the beautiful irony. Brenda's desperate attempt to eliminate my pond for a real estate commission had triggered federal intervention that would protect thousands of acres from future development. She'd tried to destroy one small sanctuary and accidentally created a massive one. Federal agents were coming back Thursday with watershed expansion paperwork. Brenda's buyers were backing out Friday, and I was about to become the most federally protected homeowner in suburban Ohio. The hunter had definitely become the hunted. Brenda's nuclear response to federal wildlife charges proved that cornered real estate agents are more dangerous than wounded bears. She filed a lawsuit against me for willful violation of community standards with malicious intent to harm neighborhood property values. The filing sought $50,000 in damages, plus forced pond removal, claiming my federal protection application was fraudulent misrepresentation designed to circumvent legitimate HOA authority. Watching her represent herself in federal court to save legal costs during her collapsed house sale was like watching someone juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle. Entertaining, but clearly ending in disaster. Her legal filing became public record, which exposed her financial desperation to every potential buyer in the county. Real estate agents started avoiding her calls when they discovered she was facing federal wildlife charges and embezzlement investigations. But Brenda's biggest mistake was attacking me while federal agents were building their case. My coalition of neighborhood allies had grown from 3 households to 15 families willing to testify about systematic harassment. Dave Santos organized evening meetings in his garage, the smell of motor oil and fresh coffee mixing with the sound of neighbors finally sharing their Brenda horror stories. She cited me for excessive ethnic decorations during Diwali, Mrs. Patel revealed, her voice trembling with remembered humiliation. Said the colored lights violated community aesthetic standards. Jennifer Wu documented everything, building a federal civil rights case that would make Brenda's legal problems exponentially worse. Systematic targeting based on ethnicity, religion, and economic status, she explained, highlighting relevant passages in federal housing discrimination law. This isn't just HOA overreach, it's constitutional violations. Meanwhile, my federal wildlife protection moved through bureaucratic channels with surprising speed. Agent Martinez explained that environmental crimes during active federal investigation triggered expedited processing. Your habitat application just became Exhibit A in a federal wildlife interference case, she said during Thursday's site visit. That makes approval basically automatic. The irony was perfect. Brenda's attempt to poison my pond had fast-tracked the federal protection she'd tried to prevent. But the sweetest revenge came from an unexpected direction. Ohio Department of Natural Resources completed their watershed assessment and determined my pond was the crucial headwater for Willow Creek's entire drainage system. Federal protection of my 12-by-8 Goldfish sanctuary triggered environmental review of the surrounding 3-square-mile area. Dr. Sarah Kim's report was bureaucratic poetry. Critical habitat protection extends to all contributing watershed areas to ensure ecosystem integrity. Translation: Brenda's house, her buyer's property, and most of our neighborhood were about to become federally regulated conservation zones. New construction would require federal environmental impact studies. Home modifications needed wildlife habitat assessments. Even lawn chemicals would be restricted to protect downstream water quality, feeding my protected pond. Brenda's house sale didn't just collapse, it became legally impossible. Her buyer's planned additions violated federal watershed protection guidelines that didn't exist when they made their offer. Their attorney withdrew from the transaction faster than a mechanic dropping a hot wrench. The $380,000 sale that had motivated 6 months of harassment was dead, taking her $11,400 commission with it. But federal agents weren't done building their case. Financial investigation revealed Brenda's embezzlement was more extensive than we'd discovered. She'd diverted $38,000 from HOA accounts over 2 years, paying her family members for imaginary services while billing residents for work that was never completed. This is organized fraud, Detective Rivera explained during his follow-up interview. Using postal services to submit false invoices makes it federal mail fraud. Combined with wildlife interference, she's looking at serious prison time. The neighborhood rebellion reached critical mass when 6 more families formally petitioned to remove Brenda as HOA president. The special meeting called to vote on her removal packed our community center beyond capacity. 63 residents in a room designed for 40. Mrs. Elise organized what she called a neighborhood unity gathering, which was really an anti-Brenda strategy session, disguised as a potluck dinner. The smell of homemade tamales, Korean barbecue, and Polish pierogi filled the air as neighbors who'd been afraid to speak finally shared their stories. She made our children feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood, Maria Santos told the crowd, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated frustration. No one should have that kind of power over families. The vote wasn't even close, 47-3 to remove Brenda immediately, with only her sister and 2 business associates supporting her continued presidency. A second motion passed, creating financial oversight committees to audit all HOA expenditures and prevent future corruption. But the most satisfying moment came when Federal Wildlife Service representatives arrived during the meeting to present my official habitat protection certificate. Federal designation prohibits any alteration, removal, or interference with this protected ecosystem, Agent Martinez announced to the packed room. Violations carry penalties up to $50,000 per incident and possible federal prison sentences. Brenda sat in the back row, her designer clothes wrinkled from jail time, watching federal agents make her 6-month crusade officially impossible. That certificate didn't just protect my pond. It protected my neighborhood from future Brendas who might mistake HOA authority for actual power. The special emergency HOA meeting that would end Brenda's reign was scheduled for Thursday evening, and the community center had never seen anything like it. 67 residents packed into a room designed for 40, with Columbus Dispatch reporter Mike Elise and Channel 6 news crews setting up cameras near the front. The air hummed with nervous energy, and the smell of too many people crowded into too small a space, like electricity building before a summer thunderstorm. Brenda arrived 20 minutes late in her damaged Lexus. Someone had keyed "Pond Killer" into the driver's side door in neat block letters. She walked through the crowd like she was crossing a minefield, her designer heels clicking against linoleum, while neighbors she'd terrorized for 2 years watched her every step. This emergency meeting will address the manufactured crisis created by certain residents who refuse to respect community standards, she began, her voice cracking under pressure as she called the meeting to order. Camera crews zoomed in on her face while she accused me of destroying neighborhood harmony through environmental extremism. The irony was beautiful. She was calling me an extremist while facing federal wildlife charges. Mr. Donnelly has manipulated federal bureaucrats into believing his backyard swamp deserves government protection, she continued, pointing at me like I was personally responsible for everything wrong in suburban America. This fraudulent designation threatens every homeowner's property rights. Dave Santos requested permission to respond to these accusations, his voice carrying the authority of a retired teacher who'd spent 30 years dealing with classroom bullies. Actually, Brenda, I think Cove has something relevant to show everyone, he said, gesturing to the federal documents I'd brought. I stood slowly, savoring the moment I'd been planning for 6 months. The room fell silent, except for the soft whir of news cameras and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. As of yesterday morning, I announced, unfolding the official certificate, this pond is federally protected turtle habitat under United States Fish and Wildlife Service designation. The room erupted in murmurs and whispers as I held up the document for cameras to record. Brenda's face drained from corporate beige to hospital white as the legal implications hit her like cold pond water. Federal designation means this habitat cannot be altered, removed, or interfered with under penalty of federal law, I continued, my voice steady with the confidence of someone holding unbeatable cards. Violations carry fines up to $50,000 and possible federal prison sentences. But I wasn't done destroying her authority. Jennifer Wu stood next, spreading financial documents across the meeting table like evidence at a trial. While we're discussing community standards, perhaps residents should know about systematic financial irregularities in HOA management. The evidence was damning. $38,000 in fraudulent payments to Brenda's family members, contracts awarded to her business without competitive bidding, community funds diverted for personal use, 2 years of systematic looting disguised as neighborhood improvement. This isn't just poor management, Jennifer explained to the room full of cameras and increasingly angry neighbors. This is criminal embezzlement of community funds. Brenda's desperate defense only made things worse. These accusations are fabricated by disgruntled residents who refuse to follow legitimate community standards. "Ma'am," came a voice from the back of the room, "are you claiming federal wildlife protection laws are illegitimate?" Everyone turned to see Agent Martinez entering the community center, her federal credentials visible on her jacket. She'd arrived right on schedule, exactly as we'd planned. "Agent Sarah Martinez, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service," she announced to the room, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "I'm here to address questions about habitat protection designation and federal wildlife interference charges." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cameras swiveled to capture Brenda's reaction, as a federal agent explained that her attempts to eliminate protected habitat constituted serious federal crimes. Federal wildlife protection cannot be challenged or overruled by local housing authorities, Agent Martinez stated clearly for the news cameras. Any interference with designated habitat constitutes federal crime with mandatory prosecution. Mrs. Elise called for an immediate vote to remove Brenda as HOA president. The motion passed 52-7, with only her immediate family and closest business associates supporting her continued leadership. A second motion passed unanimously, creating financial oversight committees to audit all HOA expenditures and prevent future corruption. But the most satisfying moment came when the court-appointed financial receiver arrived to take control of HOA assets pending criminal investigation. Ms. Ashworth, you're required to surrender all HOA financial records and property immediately, the receiver announced, accompanied by county sheriff's deputies. Federal and state investigators will conduct complete forensic accounting of community funds. Brenda left the meeting in the back of a sheriff's car, officially removed from HOA presidency and facing federal charges for wildlife interference, plus state charges for embezzlement. The woman who'd spent 2 years terrorizing neighbors with violation notices was finally facing real violations that carried actual consequences. Federal agents, not HOA presidents, now controlled my neighborhood's future. 6 months later, Brenda Ashworth was living in a different state, working at a strip mall insurance office, and facing federal probation for wildlife habitat interference. Her house sold at a $67,000 loss after sitting empty for 4 months. Turns out federal watershed protection makes it hard to find buyers interested in restricted property rights. The criminal charges were settled through plea bargain, 2 years probation, $15,000 restitution to the HOA, and permanent prohibition from holding any homeowner association office anywhere in Ohio. She'd gone from neighborhood dictator to cautionary tale in less than a year. But the real victory was what happened to our community. The new HOA leadership, led by Dave Santos as president and Mrs. Elise as treasurer, implemented transparent financial management, with monthly budget reports and competitive bidding for all contracts. The $38,000 recovered from Brenda's embezzlement funded the Willowbrook Community Improvement Fund, with actual resident oversight. My federal habitat designation attracted partnerships we never expected. Ohio State University's environmental science program adopted my pond for student research projects, bringing bright young minds to study suburban wildlife corridors. Local elementary schools schedule monthly field trips to learn about native species conservation and the importance of protecting local ecosystems. The Columbus Zoo contacted me about expanding the habitat network, connecting my protected pond to other suburban conservation sites through wildlife corridors that would benefit the entire region. What started as Dad's simple goldfish sanctuary had become the foundation for metropolitan area environmental protection. Property values actually increased 12% over the following year. Turns out federal environmental designation creates prestige that attracts eco-conscious buyers, willing to pay premium prices for conservation community living. The same habitat protection Brenda had fought to prevent became our neighborhood's most valuable selling point. My personal healing came in unexpected ways. The Friday evening ritual continued, but now I shared it with visitors from the university, neighborhood kids learning about turtle behavior, and fellow conservation volunteers who'd become genuine friends. Zeppo Jr. and the surviving Marx brothers thrived in their federally protected home, joined by an expanding painted turtle population that now numbered 8 adults plus seasonal hatchlings. Dr. Martinez's quarterly inspections confirmed the ecosystem was flourishing beyond anyone's expectations. The conservation easement provided ongoing financial benefits, $2,400 annual tax deductions, plus property tax exemptions that saved more money than Brenda's fines would have cost. Fighting her tyranny had accidentally secured my retirement finances while protecting the environment. But the most meaningful development was watching our neighborhood transform from a collection of isolated houses into an actual community. The Turtle Day Festival we organized last September drew 300 visitors from across the county, featuring local environmental groups, native plant sales, and educational booths about suburban conservation. Children who'd been afraid to play outside during Brenda's reign now spent afternoons learning about frog life cycles and native butterfly identification. Their parents organized monthly conservation workdays, expanding native plant gardens throughout the neighborhood. The ripple effects reached far beyond Willowbrook Estates. My story inspired similar federal habitat applications across suburban Ohio, creating a network of protected ponds and wetlands that supports migratory bird corridors throughout the region. Environmental lawyers now use my case as a template for fighting HOA overreach through wildlife protection laws. Jennifer Wu started a nonprofit legal clinic helping homeowners navigate HOA disputes and environmental protection applications. She calls it David versus Goliath Legal Services, and her client success rate is impressive enough to scare HOA boards throughout the Midwest. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from a homeowner in Indiana facing similar harassment over a butterfly garden. Next month, I'm driving to Kentucky to help a retired teacher fight HOA violations against his native prairie restoration. Turns out my experience defeating neighborhood tyranny through federal environmental law has become a repeatable strategy. The pond where this whole war started now sits peacefully in my backyard, surrounded by federal signs warning against interference with protected habitat. Evening sounds include increased bird songs, frog choruses, and children's laughter from environmental education visits. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's building something beautiful that outlasts your enemies.